tons and ones of rabid fans. This is Jason Bonsall, and this is In Response To. This is episode 23, in response to Steve Harvey. I was trying to think of maybe a more aggressive title to really sink my teeth into what we're going to be talking about, but I figured I'd pump the brakes on the title and just do my hard hitting with the content of the episode. I'm really going to be taking Mr. Harvey to task here. I'm going to share a clip from a video called Shit Steve Harvey Says. There's a video I saw probably 2 years ago or something like that, or at least a video that had much of the same content as this one. And this version, Shit Steve Harvey Says, has resurfaced on Reddit recently. I saw it a few days ago, and it reminded me of how aggravating the man's idiocy is. I should say I'm not that comfortable referring to him as an idiot or calling him stupid or saying he's not smart, anything like that. Based on a handful of samples on a few topics that maybe he is especially ignorant about, and he might be a perfectly intelligent genius of a man in plenty of other ways that just don't come through in this particular set of topics. So I will try not to uncharitably belittle his intelligence, although I am not hopeful based on the content of this video. The thing about it is, even if he's not well informed on these topics, the real problem comes across in what I would call his wisdom. You know, his inability or his unwillingness, say, to engage people with different ideas than his own. And actually, I'll pump the brakes there now too, and just let Mr. Harvey speak for himself first, and then I'll comment on his words. So here we go. This is a clip from the video on YouTube called Shit Steve Harvey Says, and it's a couple of interviews that he gave. Here he is, Steve Harvey.
Does he have a relationship with God? You sitting up here talking to a dude and he tells you he's an atheist, you need to pack it up and go home. You know, you talking to a person who don't believe in God, what's his moral barometer? Where is it at? It's nowhere.
Speaking of God, you say in the book that you wouldn't go out with a woman. I guess a woman should not go out with a man who doesn't believe in God.
No, I mean, why would you?
Well, do you believe that only people who are religious are ethical and moral?
No, I just believe if you don't believe in God, then where's your moral barometer? That's just me talking.
I understand.
You can believe what you want to believe,
yeah.
But if you're an atheist, you're basing your goodness and morality on what? I mean, but what is an atheist? I don't really get into that. You know, when I've talked to people all the time, I'm an atheist. I just walk away. I don't know what to say to you. You know,
well, an atheist is someone who doesn't quite believe that there is somebody out there, some God out there.
Well, then to me, you're an idiot.
Okay, well...
So I'm cool with that. I'm just probably not the right politically correct thing to say. But if you don't believe in God, I mean, really, you got to have an explanation for this. You just can't tell me this spun out of a gastrous ball.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then we were evolved from monkeys. Why we still got monkeys? It's too much open here. I just believe that. And if you don't believe that, then I don't like talking to you.
I say...
Okay, there you have it. You heard it right from his own mouth. Let's go through all the things he said on this topic. First, Joy says, do you believe only people who are religious can be ethical and moral? Now, a lot of people use this phraseology, ethical and moral, and I'm not sure they know the difference between the two. Most people, even most philosophers, use the words interchangeably, and so I think people just say that as a kind of form of rambling. They don't really know what they're saying. But put that aside, Steve's response to that question is, no, I just believe if you don't believe in God, then where is your moral barometer? So it seems like he should have said, yes, I just believe that if you don't believe in God, where is your moral barometer? But who knows? Well, where is your moral barometer? How about this? Where's your moral barometer if you do believe in God? Are you just putting all of your faith, that's a loaded word, it seems like an appropriate word, you're putting your faith in God being moral, being an indicator of what's right and wrong. That's your barometer. It's not even, in fact, your own barometer. You're just listening to some other agent, this being God. And in reference to this question, Plato's book, Euthyphro, is probably my favorite on the topic. It's very short, and I think for a philosophy book, very accessible for people. And the argument, as I see it in that book, goes like this. You really only have two options. You only have two options if you believe in God. Either whatever God says is right, in which case he could have just as easily said B is right, where he had previously said A, and there's no recourse, there's no way to argue it. If God said it, then it is right. That's what's sometimes called divine command theory. So then that doesn't seem very attractive as an ethical theory, because it's full of caprice, or at least an opportunity for caprice. God could say anything, and there's no appeal to some other standard. The other option is just that. There is a standard of what's right and wrong. Or I think Plato was talking about good or piety in the book, but it can apply just as well to any standard of right and wrong and kind of an ethical standard. So if there is such a standard of what's right and wrong, and God will obey it, so to speak, or he will be informed by this standard in choosing what's right, then you don't need God. In that case, there is a standard that we can appeal to. So there's really, on the kind of account where God's involved, there is no good choice there. God is either capricious and without a standard other than his own whim, his own, let's leave it at whim, or he's superfluous. There's already a standard out there that we can appeal to and hopefully discover. And so when Steve Harvey asks, I just believe if you don't believe in God, then where is your moral barometer? It's a rhetorical question, I take it. Sure seems like one. He really ought to consider that question for himself. If you do believe in God, where's your moral barometer? And I can actually answer his question, rhetorical though it may be. I don't believe in God, and my moral barometer is in human reason. And I've said this in previous episodes, I'm a utilitarian, at least now I am. I used to subscribe to a Kantian deontological view, but we're not going to get into all that in this episode. It's not important right now. But what's right and wrong is discoverable by reason, whether you're a utilitarian, a Kantian deontologist, a virtue ethicist, any of the pillars within ethical theory and philosophy argue that what's right and wrong is discoverable by reason, and human effort can detect and enact these conclusions. So Steve is just speaking out his ass, let's say. It seems clear, I can't say with any certainty, but it seems clear that he has never studied ethical theory or probably any philosophy, and he's just very ignorant to any kind of the arguments that have sustained, in some cases, centuries, right? In some cases, millennia of argumentation, and some extremely smart people that I will argue are much smarter than Steve Harvey and smarter than myself, have been influenced and moved by these kind of arguments, and they work for me, and they work for a lot of people who take the time to study and learn them. So I invite Mr. Harvey, because I know he's listening, to go out there and read some John Stuart Mill, read some Plato, read some Immanuel Kant, read lots of philosophy. It's good for you. Next on the checklist, Steve says atheists are idiots. Well, I kind of just addressed that with the previous thing. Lots of intelligent, extremely intelligent people in history have been atheists, are currently atheists, and I wouldn't dare call them idiots. I think more likely an idiot idiot is actually I don't know if it's still considered a medical term, but it has a definition. I think it's something like someone with the intelligence of a 3-year-old, although I don't know if that's accurate, but it's a technical term, or at least it used to be. I don't mean it in that way. I mean it in the colloquial sense, which I think is how Steve Harvey meant it as well. I think if you're going to call someone an idiot, that would be the kind of person who refuses to engage someone with different opinions than his own, and someone who ignorantly refers to people with different opinions as idiots without taking any time to understand what those opinions are and what the arguments and positions really are. Steve says, "This is just me talking here." That's a quote. "This is just me talking here." As kind of a defense. It's kind of a preemptive shield he's putting up that, hey, don't be angry with me for saying what I'm about to say, as inflammatory as it may be. This is just me talking here. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. Of course it's just you talking here. What else, who thought anything different? We know you're talking. We're interviewing you, or Joy is interviewing you. We're listening to you talk. We understood that. Thank you, Steve. He says, in a like tone, "This may not be the politically correct thing to say." Well, yeah, no shit. But who cares? We're not interested in political correctness right now. We're just examining the content of what you said and looking for any wisdom in there. I contest that there is none. He says, "You have to have an explanation for this." Let's put aside the fact that gastrus is not a word. If you search gastrus on Google, the first result, at least the first result I found, was a reference to this interview with Steve Harvey. I think that's the only use in recorded history of gastrus. He says, "You have to have an explanation for this," referring to how the universe exists at all. You can't just tell me that we exploded out of a gastrous ball and then we evolved from monkeys. Why we still got monkeys? I'm not going to attack his grammar either. His manner of speak is not important here. But there's two huge problems, if not more, with this long statement that I just went over. Yeah, actually, there are more. You have to have an explanation for this. Well, that's wrong. You don't have to have an explanation. In fact, it's okay to not know how the universe came to be. And what you don't do, or what is not a move that should be open to someone to make, is to say, well, I don't know how the universe came to be, therefore I'm going to say that I do know how the universe came to be, and just grasp whatever explanation I like. No, what you ought to do is remain in a state of just withholding commitment to any conclusion until you actually have some good reason to support one, and maybe look for some evidence if there's any to be had. You know, right now the state of science, as far as explaining the origins of the universe, it's in kind of its infancy. You know, they have not made a great deal of progress, although the Big Bang Theory, controversial though it may be among many religious people, has quite a lot of evidence to back it up. And this is not the episode to go into that. This is not the point to support the Big Bang Theory. The only point I'm trying to make right now with this is to say Steve has a very poor approach to the search for knowledge and the commitment to certain beliefs. You're not going to find truth with this kind of approach. It's not wise at all to behave this way. Next, saying that you can't just tell me that we exploded out of a gastrous ball. I'm not going to really take him to task on this one that much. That's a very poor summation of what the Big Bang Theory says, but that's okay. He wasn't trying to talk like a scientist in this moment, and it really wasn't important to the interview, so I'm going to give him a pass on that. Let's move on to the very next thing he said. We evolved from monkeys. Why we still got monkeys? That has nothing to do with the origin of the universe. That has nothing to do with the Big Bang Theory. It would have nothing to do with the explosion of a gastrous ball if one ever existed. Evolving, well, let's say this. The theory of evolution explains the diversity of life. It doesn't explain the origin of life, and it certainly doesn't explain the origin of the universe or anything to do with physical law, the law of nature, anything like that. So he's totally conflated. He's not the only one to do this. Lots of people do this when they don't understand the domains of science here. But you really got to understand that why the universe exists, how the universe exists, that they have nothing to do with evolutionary theory. Furthermore, what's probably even a worse mistake is that we didn't evolve from monkeys. we evolved from a common ancestor along with monkeys. In other words, the monkeys and human beings have evolved from a common ancestor. And so why we still got monkeys isn't even a question that makes any sense at all. We had a common ancestor, let's just call it A. A gave rise to human beings down one fork in the biological record, and it gave rise to monkeys down a different fork in the biological record. There's no why we still got anything that would make sense to ask. So, sorry, Steve, you don't understand evolutionary theory. You don't understand its place in science whatsoever. So let's leave that aside for right now. Let's move on to the next thing he said. If you don't believe in God, if you're an atheist, well, I don't want to talk to you. That is the most ignorant, unwise, childish attitude and position you could possibly take when it comes to learning, meeting new people, understanding different ideas. Of course he doesn't understand any of these concepts. He doesn't want to talk to anybody that does because they think differently than he does. If you believe these things, you're an idiot, he says. So, sorry, Steve, you're way off base in pretty much everything you talked about in this video. I mean, I would love to say that I don't want to talk to you, but I actually do want to talk to you. I want to understand if you can do a better job explaining what you actually think on these things rather than just a few minute, maybe 2-minute clip from a YouTube collection of your interviews. I would love to hear it because I don't want to be guilty of attacking a straw man here. Sometimes you say things off the cuff, and I can only imagine what it's like to be on TV and giving an interview like this. And maybe you say things that you don't actually mean. So I can be forgiving. Steve, call me. I'll private message you my phone number. Here it comes. Check your email. The real problem with all this, and most of the reason why I even thought it important enough to make an episode about, is that so many people watch and listen to Steve Harvey. He has a talk show where people ask him advice. In fact, parts of this video that I'm talking about have people asking him for advice. He wrote at least one book, probably more, I'm not certain about that. And people actually think he's some kind of guru that is worth listening to on life advice, relationship advice. He's not at all qualified to be giving advice to anyone when it comes to religion, certainly, but he's mixing relationship advice in with this kind of talk. That's how it started with the Joy Behar interview when she was referring to his argument that a man should not go out with an atheist, and she assumed that he also meant a woman should not go out with an atheist. So it's all tied up into one ball of ignorance, and he's just not a credible influencer. No one should be looking to this man for advice. So I wanted to just make this episode because if you're the kind of person who tunes in to Steve's sage wisdom with any regularity or even very rarely, I urge you to stop. I urge you to ask yourself why you should put any stock in what this man says, and maybe look for a better source of wisdom and advice. I considered performing an exegesis on the entire video because Steve talks about several other topics too, but I felt like at this point, I think this video has been going on for 18 plus minutes. That's enough hard-hitting negativity. I consider this hard-hitting negativity. You know, I don't like to be in this mode, but if this video gets a certain kind of response and people want me to continue attacking, so to speak, what Steve Harvey says in the video called Shit Steve Harvey Says, then I probably will go on and finish out criticizing the rest of what he said, or at least responding to it in how I actually feel about it, because to be truthful, the entire video is not irredeemable. Some things in the video I think get unfairly criticized, and I'll actually offer some bit of a defense if I'm going to talk about the rest of it. But that could be for another time. For now, I'm going to close shop, sign off. Thank you for tuning in. This has been episode 23 in response to Steve Harvey.